Made with Spoken. Through the Gap by Doug Sjoquist. Digital narration performed by Jonathan. Wilderness rescue training. The cliff respected nothing, forgave nothing. One wrong move, 100-foot fall onto granite knives. Piper climbed hand over hand, wedging her boots into one crack after another, pulling herself up the final pitch and over the lip. Her instructor, Victor, watched silently. She caught her breath, then moved to the rigging to begin the final step of the exercise for the 3 trainees. Russell moved to the cliff's edge next to Victor. Below them, Thomas waited on a ledge halfway down Looking Glass Rock, playing the injured climber. "You sure she's ready?" Russell's voice was sharp and loud. 20 feet back, Piper's hands clenched the belay rope. 2 weeks carrying my weight, literally, and he still questions everything. She turned to look at Victor, Russell's doubt hanging in the air like a frayed rope. Victor caught her glance, eyebrows raised in quiet question. "Yes." The word came out harsher than intended. Victor turned back to Russell. "We're good. Watch those crevices as you descend. Rattlers occasionally den here." Russell leaned into the rigging and stepped off the cliff. Her arms strained against the burden as she fed him rope. He called out, "Stopping!" Victor confirmed Russell's position and gave her a quick thumbs up. She smiled briefly, then flicked her long ponytail back over her shoulder and focused on the rigging until there was a small tug on the rope. Several minutes passed while she waited for Russell to move Thomas onto the stretcher. Victor checked his watch. "Russell, something wrong?" Russell tugged the rope sharply, then called up, "Ready for haul!" Piper began the arduous work of coiling the excess rope at her feet. The pulley system made it possible to assist Russell with the stretcher, but it did not make it easy. She reached forward to begin another pull. The rope jerked, then flew through the rigging. Burn marks darkened Piper's gloves. Piper quickly threw 2 loops of free rope around the anchor rock. The force of the rope tightening almost knocked her off her feet, but the sudden descent had stopped. The muscles in her forearms strained, but she forced herself to breathe through it and stared at the failed auto-lock. "Russell, you okay?" Victor called out. The seconds stretched out as she held tight. Foothold broke. Good now. The tension on the rope eased as Russell regained a foothold for his own weight on the cliff face. Piper adjusted the rigging enough to restart the haul. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her shoulders ached with each pull. She paused and took a deep breath, stretching her fingers one at a time to stave off the cramps. The rescue stretcher scraped the lip of the rock outcropping. Locking the rope, she glanced back. Russell's yellow helmet rose over the lip as he climbed onto the ledge and checked the stretcher. "Patient secure." Victor walked over and picked up Piper's rigging as she released the tension. "What happened?" Piper hesitated. "I know I said it right." Victor pulled back the autolock's outer clamp and examined it. His face contorted as he turned it over in his hand, working the mechanism. He called over his shoulder, "Hank, take a look at this." Russell looked up from the stretcher and stared at Hank as the man approached. Hank, the training center's equipment manager, left the bin he had been loading and joined them. Holding out the auto-lock to show Hank, Victor pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. "Ever see one of these break like that?" Hank gave it a cursory glance. "Nope, but out here, anything can happen." Victor handed it to Piper. "The lock failed. Nothing you could have done." Piper turned the device over in her hands, opening and closing it several times. She held it out in her palm to Hank and pointed to scratch marks next to the catch. "These look unnatural, don't you think?" Hank cleared his throat, then took it from her hand without making eye contact. "Dunno. I'll take a look later." He pocketed it and turned to leave. Right now? I've got to get the rest of the gear packed. Russell's eyes followed Hank as he trotted back to the bin. His stare was broken when Victor knelt down next to him and picked up one of the attached ropes. You should have rigged a prusik backup below the lock. If Piper had hesitated, even for a second. Russell's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Equipment fails, Victor said. Plan for it. This is how people die. You were lucky this time. He stood. Fortunately, Piper's quick thinking kept things from getting worse. Thomas was struggling to reach his restraints in the stretcher, oblivious to the interchange. You gonna just leave me hanging? Russell gave him a stony look. Thomas's grin faded. This is not a game, Russell said quietly. People trust you. Gotta get it right. Thomas thrashed on the stretcher, prompting a grin from Piper. You are loving this, aren't you, cuz? He asked. Laughing, she bent down and unclipped the restraints. Thomas stood, brushing dirt from his shirt. Holding out his hands for a dual fist bump, he said, Thanks for the rescue. Russell hesitated, then responded with a bump to Thomas, but ignored Piper's outstretched hand. Thomas gave Piper a fist bump followed by a hang loose gesture, their signature moves since they were kids. If only Grandpa could see us now, right? Piper deepened her voice and did her best Grandpa impression. Job's not done till it's done, Thomas. Thomas's face twisted as he muttered, Yes, sir. Then playfully punched her arm and winked. Russell shook his head at their antics, grabbed the stretcher, and walked off. Piper moved closer to Thomas. What's that about? Thomas waited for Russell to move out of earshot. I don't know. He's not like that with everyone. Just you, unfortunately. Great, she said with a heavy breath. Just my luck. Thomas bumped her shoulder. Whatever Russell's problem is, don't let him get in your head. That evening, Piper stirred the coals in the old stone fire pit with a hickory branch, then held up the orange tip and wrote her name in the air. Moonlight transformed the dark field outside the training center to silver, the firs rising like sentinels. Smoke drifted past, carrying the sweet char of burning oak. Perfect. She took a sip of wine, watching sparks spiral into the dark, then leaned back to watch the stars. A screen door creaked. She looked behind her. Thomas. Got a minute? He asked. Sure. Did some digging. Small-town paper in Colorado, 4 years ago. He turned his phone so she could see the headline. Local teacher dies in wilderness rescue attempt. Willow Crawford, Thomas said, pulling it back. Middle school teacher. She was leading a summer trip of students when one got injured, trying to do a technical rescue herself. Piper waited for him to continue. Rope system failed. She died trying to help him. He scrolled to the obit. Preceded in death by both parents and survived by an older brother. Russell. Piper's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes darted to the common room. Thomas continued. Says she just finished wilderness first responder training out west somewhere and was excited to share her love of the outdoors with her students. He met her eyes and handed her his phone. Sound familiar? Teacher, new certification, enthusiastic. Piper took it and scrolled to the photo at the top. A young woman with a bright smile, standing at a trailhead with a group of kids. She looked back at him. I remind him of her. Thomas shrugged. Think so, yeah. Piper let out a breath and stared at the fire. Investigation concluded she had exceeded her training. She was capable, just took on more than she could handle. Piper wiped moisture from her eyes with the back of a knuckle. I'm not saying it's okay. He is being a jerk. But it's not about you. Piper nodded. I don't know what I would do if I lost someone like that, he said. She stared at the fire, a knot forming in her stomach. Piper was usually early for meetings, but Willow's face kept her up until the early morning. She grabbed a burnt cup of coffee before finding a seat between Russell and Thomas in the front. Thomas grinned. Sleeping in? Grandpa would have rousted you at 5. He deepened his voice. Shouldn't need no stinking alarm. She gave him a gentle shove. Made it, didn't I? Thomas held up his hands in mock surrender. Piper turned towards Russell, keeping her voice even. What do you think the evaluations will be like? Russell shrugged, continuing to leaf back and forth in his notebook, his features as unyielding as granite. I'm trying here. Meet me halfway. The buzz in the room died. Even then, he didn't look up. But when the director stepped to the podium, they both straightened up. Welcome back. I trust you got some rest. You will need fresh legs and a fresh mind. Those of you seeking Wilderness First Responder certification have been paired off and will have an arduous, multi-day challenge where you will be evaluated as an individual and as a team. Groans and shaking heads spread across the room as he paused. Each pair will be dropped in the backcountry tomorrow at locations where we have not trained. Your task is to reach the simulated victim, assess their injuries, and get them to a designated pickup point. You'll be working in shining rock wilderness, high country terrain, with exposed peaks, steep drainages, minimal trails. You may encounter wildlife, so watch your step, watch your surroundings. Make sure your first aid kit is complete and accessible. You'll have maps, compasses, and a single radio for emergency use only, making decisions in unfamiliar territory. That's the whole point. The assignments are posted in back. Good luck. The WFR trainees scurried to the bulletin boards. Piper and Thomas hung back, waiting for the crowds to clear. After a few minutes, Thomas went to check while Piper gathered her things. As she passed the doorway, she heard hurried steps in the hallway. Then Russell's voice. Switch back. The steps stopped. Russell's voice turned low as he growled. Hank, is it? There was a brief scuffle and thump against the wall. The response was muffled. Dunno what you're talking about, old man. Did you think I wouldn't find you? If Victor doesn't suspect what happened out there, he'll know soon. Things happen. People get hurt. Not my problem. Footsteps. One set scurrying into the back offices. Piper's neck tingled. Russell passed the open door, glancing behind him as he moved to the exit. Piper, unsure what to make of the conversation, finally noticed Thomas waving her over to the bulletin board, where he scanned the list with his finger. He jerked his hand back as she joined him. Pip, I'm sorry. What? But she was already scanning the list for her name. Pipre K. Malloy Russell Crawford. Pipre? Really, Victor? I've corrected you twice already. Russell. She let out a heavy breath. Thomas put his hand on her shoulder and leaned in. I'd swap if I could. You know it. It's fine. We could talk to Victor. Thomas. She grabbed his hand and slid it off her shoulder. I can handle it. Thomas didn't look convinced, but he squeezed her hand. Grandpa didn't raise quitters. No, he did not. Evaluated as an individual and as a team. She took a breath. Great. Final evaluation. The next morning, Piper hefted her pack as the battered sprinter drove off, clattering through ancient ruts in the worn logging road. Road was generous. Decades had passed with no maintenance. Second-growth poplars and thorny locusts had reclaimed the land, giving way higher up to the old forest. Massive oaks with trunks nearly as wide as the road, hickory and hemlock building a canopy that turned the understory dark, even in the brightest sun. Humidity hung thicker than syrup. Sweat beaded on her neck. Mist from yesterday's rain rose from the valley floor, outlining a creek as it curled under the canopy hundreds of feet below. Beyond the valley, blue-green ridges rose in ranks, fading into the morning haze. At least we weren't the last ones, she said, turning to watch Russell. Russell looked up from the map he had laid out on the ground next to his open notebook and studied the tree line above them. Just farthest out. Why would you say that? Most experience. Hardest assignment. It fits. He didn't bother looking up. Spotter called out a large stream in a clearing. "That means the one over the ridge," she said. Large is relative. Spur forms a bowl, means a pool, meadow. He turned his gaze to the ridge she pointed out, then scanned the path they would have to take to get there. Besides, that one is too obvious. They'll want to challenge us. She turned from the map and moved her eyes along the spur down from the ridge. There was clearly a hidden area behind the spur. Maybe he isn't just being a jerk. "You might be right," she said, considering the valley above them. "Might be?" He huffed and shook his head. "If it comes to nothing, it will be easier to cross the ridge from higher up." As Russell cinched his pack closed, something inside caught her eye. A hard edge, angular and out of place. She looked again, but the pack was shut. She shrugged it off and reached for her own pack. "Okay, let's move." They hiked for hours without speaking, reaching the small clearing in late afternoon. Cicadas droned in the heat. Gnats swarmed in shafts of slanting light. There was no one there. Piper stared at Russell, waiting for acknowledgement that she had been correct, but he simply sat and pulled out his map. "We should make camp," Piper said finally. "Get an early start tomorrow." Russell folded his map and stood. "Fine." He moved to a location against a rock ledge with a clear view of the meadow. For 2 long minutes, he surveyed the sightlines around him. Piper, trying to decipher what he was looking for, followed his gaze until he dropped his pack and moved it out of her view. He stuffed something into his belt, then began to make camp. Piper moved farther into the trees. As she finished staking her last guy line down, a fat drop of rain smacked her cheek. Heavy drops slapped against the large oak leaves as a curtain of rain marched towards her, an increasing drumbeat in the canopy overhead. Before the torrent could reach her, she slid under the rainfly and into her tent, pulling her pack with her. Within moments, the storm hit. The rain didn't so much fall as attack-solid waves of water overwhelmed her small tent, the thumping of the rainfly almost drowning out the sound of the torrent, each gust compressing the tent fabric around her. What had been distant rumbles of thunder now boomed. Lightning crackled through the forest, illuminating the translucent fabric of her tent in spurts. A natural strobe light showing outlines of trees bent nearly to the ground in one flash, then upright in the next. One bolt struck so close that her ponytail, damp as it was, puffed like a startled cat's tail. The accompanying thunder made the forest floor rumble under her. As it faded, a nearby oak groaned and cracked, crashing through the underbrush like an avalanche. The rumbles and flashes moved down the valley. During the relative silence, she heard Russell curse, but before she could call out, the storm renewed its assault, drowning out a final shout from Russell. She hadn't been in a mountain storm like this since she was a teenager with her family in the Adirondacks. At least then they had a cabin. She'd never experienced this, never felt so exposed. The storm raged for hours. Her heart lurched with every gust and falling branch. Brief lulls in intensity ended with stronger sheets of water hammering her tent. Her shoulders tensed at each break, bracing for the return of the onslaught. Eventually, exhaustion won, and sleep came deep in the night. She stirred at first light and emerged to devastation. The air hung heavy with the scent of crushed vegetation and shredded branches. No trace of the trail was left. Blue sky shone directly overhead where an oak as wide as she was tall had fallen less than 10 yards from her tent. Her eyes followed the trunk to the massive root ball, whose tendrils reached to Russell's tent. One root had pulled his guy lines loose and ripped through the rainfly. The bright blue fabric lay still, covered by oak and hickory branches. She started towards it, but stopped as the brush moved aside and Russell crawled out. He pushed aside the debris and looked towards Piper. He closed his eyes and sighed deeply, then bent the root aside and pulled himself to his feet to survey the damage. "You okay?" Piper asked. Russell met her eyes and shrugged, then reached through the brush to drag his pack out and began packing up what remained of his gear. The fierce storm overnight left fresh landslides and covered their trail with blown-down trees, adding hours to their hike. They made frequent detours around deadfalls and washouts. Each time, Russell scanned their surroundings before leaving the trail. At first, Piper didn't take note, but after the third or fourth time, she watched him carefully. When he caught her watching, he stared at her, his face tight. Finally, he ran his eyes across the ridge and picked his way through the brush. As the sun neared its peak, they crested a shoulder of the mountain, overlooking a substantial clearing with a large stream. The rush of water reached them before the view did. Piper said nothing. She didn't need to. The trail crossed the wetland on the edge of the meadow, muck sucking at their boots, the earth demanding its toll. Red-winged blackbirds objected from their thrones of cattails, their calls sharp and territorial in the humid air. Piper's boots squelched rudely with each step. More than once she had to stop and wiggle a boot free to keep from losing it to the insatiable mud. Behind her, Russell cursed as one foot sank deep into the bog, flooding his boot. Composting vegetation surfaced unwanted memories of decaying cabbage left hidden in musty root cellars. Each step launched a fresh burst of sulfur stink from the moldy remains. When they reached solid ground, Russell stopped. "We should split up and search." "I don't think so. Best way to cover more ground." Piper waited for him to look at her, then bit back a grin and pointed across the meadow. Victor sat under a tree, smiling and waving. Russell huffed. "Guess you were right," he said, his voice flat. She stared at him as he moved past her, muttering. "Piper, Russell," Victor said, handing Piper a piece of paper. "What's that?" Russell said, as Victor lay down in the dirt and closed his eyes. Piper laughed when she saw their names at the top of the list of symptoms and injuries. Team 4, Pipra M, Russell C. She handed the list to Russell, then bent next to Victor. "I keep telling you, Piper, not RE. Russell scanned the list and looked down at the instructor. Scowling, he said, "Let's get this over with." 20 minutes later, they had bandaged his non-existent head wound, immobilized his healthy head and neck, splinted a perfectly good femur, and then unfolded the traverse stretcher. Regardless, they eased him onto the stretcher and secured him in textbook fashion. Russell opened the map, then looked around the valley. "The way we came in is no good," Piper said. "No kidding." Ignoring his snarl, she drew a line with her finger on the map. "If we head lower, we can cross this saddle," she said. "Ridge first while we've got legs, then down to pickup." "I disagree. More storm damage on the ridge." Russell stared at her. She added, "It will slow us down. Again. People die when they don't get help soon enough." His voice went flat. "You're as stubborn as my sister." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes, a flash of something older than anger, made her back down. He pulled on his pack, brushed past her, and moved to the head of the stretcher. "The ridge is the right call. I'll take the lead. Grab his feet." Piper's neck tensed and her cheeks heated. The set of his face told her he wasn't going to let this go. Her jaw tensed, teeth clenching. She said, "Fine, let's go." "I was right about the clearing," she thought as they moved out. "I know I'm right about the way out. Why won't he listen to me?" They moved up the ridge slowly, having to detour around fresh storm damage several times. But eventually, The deer trail they had been following reached the top of the ridge. They lowered the stretcher in a small clearing, and Piper bent down to check his neck for a pulse. He opened his eyes briefly and grinned at her, then returned to his dormant state. "Will he live?" Russell asked with a huff. "Check his splint," Piper said, tilting a water bottle to their victim's mouth. He grumbled as he bent down and adjusted the straps and splint on Victor's leg. His hands moved thoroughly but efficiently, careful to verify his own work. He stepped aside and motioned for her to double-check. "Very professional. Too bad he's such a jerk." "The victim is stable. We should continue the extract," Piper said finally. "I agree," Russell said, this time without attitude. They took their time moving down the other side. Coming around a spur, she saw their first major obstacle. The trail was gone. In its place, a wide gash where the mountain had lost its battle with the storm. A raw scar, oozing gravel and mud. Russell cursed. "Set him down," Russell said, waiting for her to lower her end before doing the same. She joined him at the head and looked at the large landslide in front of them. "Can't go back," he said, glancing behind them at the spur, then up along the ridgeline. "Any ideas, partner?" Piper sighed. "None of the choices are good, but we've got to get across." She broke off a long, stiff branch from a fallen fir near the trail and poked at the loose piles along the edge. Her prodding produced several small slides, but after moving up the slope a bit, she found a stable area and made it halfway across. She returned to the head of the stretcher. "I'll lead." Russell shrugged and picked up his end. After reaching the checkpoint, they lowered the stretcher and she poked ahead a few feet. "This is too loose. We need to back up." She stopped at the sound of pebbles rolling down the hill. Russell was scanning the cliff wall above them and started moving up the slope above her. "Whoa," she said, holding out both palms. Her peripheral vision caught a hint of movement above the cliff just as he took a step. "It's fine. I found a—" His step shifted a large slab stuck in the scree. It broke loose, driving a half-ton of ragged shards towards Piper. She lunged to grab the stretcher, hooking her arm through a loop as it pulled her in its wake. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Russell fly past on a fast-moving stream of debris. The raging river of rock took control. Granite needles drew bloody swirls on her arms and legs. The stretcher surfed along the crest, pulling them all down the mountainside. Her brain kicked into hyperdrive, stretching each surreal second thin, punctuating the grinding roar with every heartbeat. The stretcher was torn away, and she fought to keep her head above the flow. The torrent slowed to a trickle. The only sound now was the diminished echoes bouncing between ridges. As Piper slid to a stop, the echoes faded. The stillness was broken only by a single pebble bouncing past and the throbbing in her temple. Coughing up dust, she spat out grit, the taste of copper lingering. The silence pressed harder than the fall had. Wary of restarting the slide, she lifted her head and called out, "Russell, Victor, are you okay?" No sound but the wind. Piper twisted onto her left shoulder to pull her right arm free. An electric shock surged up her left arm. The forearm was bent where it should have been straight. Vertigo and nausea overwhelmed her. Every beat of her heart drummed in her temples. As the pulsing pain in her forearm eased, the screech of a Cooper's hawk broke through the mental haze. She opened her eyes and looked around. The stretcher with Victor strapped inside was partially buried and canted at an odd angle, but closer to the far edge of the slide than she was. Victor's head remained immobilized, but this time, he was clearly unconscious. Russell's pack lay 10 yards below her, ripped clean of the items he had attached to the outside. Near it, a corner of his bright blue tent protruded from the rubble. A young fir had snapped, and the broken trunk and branches had shredded Russell's green rain tarp between her and the pack. "Russell?" Piper focused her mind on the sounds around her and forced herself to listen for several minutes, then yelled his name as loudly as she could one last time. No reply came. As gently as possible, she probed her left forearm with her good hand. It was a full break, but did not poke through the skin. She sat still, every move a pulse of pain. The hillside was too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Maybe I should wait for help. Surely someone will come when we don't show up. She looked down the slope at Victor, then at Russell's pack. Her statement to Russell echoed in her mind. People die when they don't get help soon enough. Sighing, she steeled herself to act. Laying her damaged arm in her lap, she worked the straps and buckles on her now shredded pack. After the last buckle was released, the pack fell backwards, jerking her arm and sending a surge of pain up to her neck. She eased her damaged arm out of the strap and for an excruciating few minutes cradled it against her body. Working her good arm behind her, she unclipped a loop of paracord from the pack, pulled her spare shirt from its top, and laid them in her lap. Her probe stick had snapped, but half of it jutted from the debris below, just out of reach. Gritting her teeth, she leaned and hooked a finger under a knot and pulled. The pain surged, and she nearly gave up, but a second attempt pulled the stick free. Nausea and vertigo roared back, the tide threatening to overwhelm her. Keep moving. Don't think. Victor needs you. She clenched her jaw and straightened up. Taking a measured breath, she spread the spare shirt on her lap and cut several short lengths of paracord. Laying the cord on the shirt, she placed the stick across them. She gingerly lifted her left forearm next to the stick, the sudden throb in her arm forcing out a groan. Laughing bitterly, she did her best to tie off the paracord with one hand, then wrapped a sleeve from the shirt around her neck and took a deep breath. A nerve-shattering spasm reverberated through her shoulder as she pulled the shirt around her arm. Holding one sleeve in her teeth, she tied off the other, then leaned back and closed her eyes, counting heartbeats until the pounding in her temples dulled. She twisted onto her knees, pushed at the gravel with her foot, and waited. Nothing but a few grains slid, so she stood. The slide had pushed her closer to the far side, only a few yards away. Downslope past Russell's pack, she saw his bright orange hat caught on half-buried brush, but no sign of Russell. Don't you dare be gone. She picked up her pack with her good arm and chose a granite outcropping below Victor as her landmark. 10 steps, maybe 12. Each step started a fresh rivulet of sand and gravel. Halfway to her mark, her calf cramped, sending her to the ground, her left shoulder taking the brunt as she turned to protect her forearm. Debris briefly picked up steam before stopping. She pushed to her feet and carried the pack at her side. 4, maybe 5 more steps. She reached the edge, lowered herself below the granite outcrop, leaned back into the solidity of the rock, and closed her eyes. Her breathing grew fast and shallow. She forced herself to slow it, deepen it. After a few minutes, the sharpness of the pain lost its edge. She took a long drink, ate a handful of granola, and downed several ibuprofen. Glancing at the sun, she tried to judge how long it had been since Russell's misstep had brought down havoc. Maybe minutes. Maybe forever. "Russell!" she shouted again, the name cracking her throat. No response. She reached for the radio on her belt, but only the clip remained. She scanned the rubble she had so recently escaped. It's gotta be out there somewhere. But I can't go back. Then she remembered. Victor had a radio too. She grabbed her pack and moved upslope to a large hemlock near Victor. He lay partially buried along with the bent aluminum of the traverse, but only a yard from the edge. His chest expanded and contracted. Good. He's breathing. She unclipped a small coil of rope from her pack and took tentative steps onto the slide. Putting her hand on his neck, she found a steady but low pulse. His makeshift head bandage was gone, but in its place was a knot and a gash oozing blood. Thankfully, the strap she had attached earlier held his head and neck in place. She tied the rope to the stretcher and moved back behind the hemlock. Bracing her legs against it, she began pulling. Victor grunted, but did not regain consciousness as she fought the weight of the rubble covering his legs. Finally, she felt him move, and when she tugged again, the stretcher snapped free along with Victor, sending a fresh slump of gravel and sand down slope, burying the remains of Russell's green tarp. She froze until the shifting stopped, her heart hammering and blocking thought. She pulled him under the shade of the hemlock. His breathing and pulse were steady, so she moved to check his head. The bleeding had slowed as the blood and dirt coagulated in the gash. The knot was black and blue, and when she pried open his eyelids, neither eye was responsive. She washed his head wound, applied antibiotics, and attached a clean bandage from her pack. Concern for him was overshadowed by their need for help, so she dug into the side pockets of his jacket. No radio. Patting down the pockets in the cargo pants he wore, she found some granola and jerky along one leg, but the other pockets were ripped away. Unzipping his jacket, she reached inside and searched the pockets. There. Let this work. Please. The radio looked undamaged. She turned it on. Nothing. Not even static. She tossed the useless radio to the ground and stared at the ridge. Her eyes followed a spur up the other side to the gap that led to their pickup point. Russell would already have his map and notebook out charting their path. Her eyes moved back to the slide. Russell, where are you? A red lanyard in her open pack caught her eye. My whistle! She blew 3 sharp blasts, the echo coming back faintly. She tried twice more before giving up and stuffing it into her pocket. Desperate to find Russell and knowing there was nothing more she could do for Victor, Piper broke a new stick from a nearby deadfall for support and picked her way through the brush down to Russell's gear. His tent was buried too far to reach, but his orange hat was close. No blood? That's good. She reached out to snag a strap on his pack with her stick and dragged it to her feet. Even though everything strapped to the outside had been ripped free, it still felt much heavier than she expected. She remembered the hard edge she'd glimpsed in his pack, and curiosity got the best of her. Opening the pack, she saw the matte black barrel of a handgun sticking out of the holster, the letters XR920 etched on the slide. Russell, what is going on? The sharp cry of the Cooper's hawk, reclaiming its perch, broke through her confusion. She shook her head and blinked, set the pack aside, and stood to begin searching the area. A boulder stood tall through the rubble below her, undisturbed in the river of debris. It had split the torrent before it spilled over the edge of a small cliff. She stared at the edge where the slide disappeared, unable to process the possibilities that danced through her mind. Something was out of place. The rubble nearest her came to a stop along a distinct line. It was too straight. That line led to a small crevice in the cliff, cut by a seasonal run and filled with azalea and rhododendron. Cool air rose from the gap, carrying the smell of damp stone. She eased down the slope. A low moan came from the crevice. Russell? Russell's voice was strained. Willow? Russell? Only silence met her this time. I can't see you. Please say something. Willow, it hurts. Can't hold on. Russell, it's Piper. I'm here. She waited, but no answer came. Pulling Victor across the slide was one thing. Pulling Russell up and out? A rustling in the brush below brought her out of her thoughts. Piper? How bad are you hurt? Russell's voice was weak. Leg broke bad. No. The clarity of Russell's reply stopped her. What? She asked. Not you. Get help. Seriously. You fool, you'll die here. Taking a deep breath, she ignored him. Russell, can you climb? Russell groaned and shifted, rustling the bush and sending gravel skittering down the crevice. He replied weakly, Don't think so. Then I need to come get you. Russell responded even more forcefully than before. Don't try Willow. Moisture formed in Piper's eyes. Thomas told me about her. It wasn't your fault. Willow, she's wasn't ready, wasn't an accident. So that's what this is about. Russell, it's Piper. I'll get you out. The silence that followed said volumes. Piper wiped her eyes, then moved to retrieve a small coil of rope. After tying one end to an ancient stump behind her, she knelt at the crevice's edge. She gauged the distance to Russell, measured out some rope, and looped the middle of it around her waist for a safety line, then tied a loop in the loose end. She stretched her leg into the crevice, found a foothold, then searched for the next. When she put weight on it, the rock gave way, sending a small stream of dirt and gravel down onto Russell. Piper, stop. Undeterred, she continued. One more step down. Can you see my hand? Yes. Afraid to let go. Piper changed to her stern teacher tone. Do it, Russell. Now. The rope jerked. Good. Hang on. Climbing back out sent stabs of pain through her broken arm and bad shoulder. She collapsed on the ledge, then moved behind the stump. Piling up slack as she tugged him out foot by foot, she yelled, Climb, Russell! Climb! He called out. Wait! She collapsed, panting. Russell, you're almost there. Don't quit on me now. My leg. I can't. Push with your good one, and I'll pull. Ready? Russell jiggled the rope. Here we go. Finally, his hand appeared. She looped the rope around the stump, scrambled to the edge, grabbed his wrist, and hauled him up, both of them falling back onto the ledge. He landed on her broken forearm, forcing out a scream. In her agony, she almost pushed him back into the crevice. With a grunt, she rolled him off onto the ground next to her. Piper sat up and checked her sling, then pulled herself onto her knees to check Russell's injuries. He was breathing regularly now, but lay with his eyes closed. Don't pass out on me, she said, scanning his large frame. His shirt was shredded on the left side, blood-stained where he had used it to slow the blood loss. His left leg below the knee had an angle that shouldn't be there. Putting her hand on one side of his neck, then the other, she felt around the back and top of his head. Russell groaned and opened his eyes. How bad is it? He asked. Your head and neck seem okay. Your leg is broken. I have to immobilize it somehow. Thankfully, no, she said. Piper broke her support stick in half, then laid the pieces on each side of his leg. She readied the rope, then grabbed his chin and turned his face towards her. Get ready. Russell's question died in a scream when she shoved the rope under his calf. He lay back, panting through gritted teeth as she worked to loop the rope around the rest of his leg. Sorry, had to, she said, pulling the tatters of his shirt away from his side. You have a few scrapes and abrasions, but I'm mostly worried about this gash. Tried to stop the blood. Just busy hanging on. Hold this, I'll be right back. You need antibiotics and a proper bandage before we move you. Move me. Let me be. Piper sat back on her haunches and looked up at a passing cloud. Pinching the bridge of her nose and closing her eyes, she took a deep breath, then leaned in close. Russell, you're on the edge of a cliff next to an unstable pile of rubble that you brought down on the three of us. You want to stay here and wait for the rest of the hillside to take you over the edge? Be my guest." With that, she stood and turned away. "Wait," Russell said, reaching out towards her. "You're right," he said, breathless. No kidding, she thought, pressing her lips together as she glanced at him. She moved back up the slope and returned with his pack. Russell had passed out, so she knelt back by him and checked his pulse, then pulled water and a fresh shirt from his pack. She rinsed the wound, then folded the shirt and placed it over it, grabbed his hand, and pressed it down. He jerked alert with a cry and looked at her with tears running down his cheek. Piper softened as she looked him in the eyes. Sighing, she reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. She knelt beside him, put the water bottle to his lips, and handed him some granola and several ibuprofen. "Here, eat, then swallow these. It will help with the swelling." Nodding to his makeshift compress, she said, "Keep pressure on that." It took almost an hour to bandage him with the few supplies she had. When she finished, she helped him to stand. He leaned heavily on her good arm as they moved, not daring to put any weight on his leg. Great. Now we're in a three-legged race. They reached the hemlock where Victor lay, and she helped him down to lean against the boulder. She dug through her pack, pulled out some jerky, and ripped it in half. Handing a piece to Russell, she leaned back on the rock, feeling his weight beside her and listening to Victor's slow breaths. The hemlock's branches swayed gently above them. The mountain was finally, mercifully, still. On her own. A ground squirrel skittered across her pack, bringing Piper out of her stupor. When she adjusted position to shoo it away, Russell stirred next to her. "How's Victor?" he asked. "Stable but unresponsive. He needs a lot more than I can give him." Russell's eyes fluttered, then closed. "What about the radio? Busted or buried? Even tried the whistle. No one around to hear it." They sat quietly until Piper leaned forward and pulled out the holster from his pack. "Why are you carrying, Russell? I'm certain the training center didn't approve this." Russell looked at the gun in her hand. "Give that to me." When he moved to take it, she scooted away, out of his reach. "Not until you tell me what's going on." Russell attempted a quick lunge, but fell back with a groan, refusing to answer. He closed his eyes, taking several long, slow breaths before reaching out again. Piper moved farther away and simply looked at him. Finally, he pulled his arm back and motioned to Victor. "His breathing's shallow." Piper looked at Victor without responding. "One of us has to go for help," he said. "I'd go, if I could." Something in his tone made her look soften. It was more than the pain speaking. She gave a faint laugh. "I know. I need that," he said, nodding towards the gun she still held. "Why?" "Hank." "The equipment guy? Again. Why?" "The autolock failure at Looking Glass. It wasn't an accident. Hank did it. He wants me dead." Piper snorted. "You're delusional, Russ." She waved the gun towards the slope below them. He looked away, tears flowing freely now. "He killed Willow." Piper stared at him, wide-eyed, jaw agape. The fox squirrel returned, skittering across the rock to where Russell had dropped his jerky. Piper shook her head at the noise and gathered her wits. Russell continued. "He meant to kill me, but Willow took my place on that trip." "Hank? He's harmless. He was using backcountry trails to traffic narcotics. I only knew his trail name." "Switchback?" Russell nodded. "I didn't know it was him at the time, but later I connected the dots." Piper looked away, trying to make sense of it all. "Who are you, Russell?" "Colorado State Patrol, but this is personal. My boss didn't think there was anything to it. I signed up for the training to get proof." She turned back to him. "That argument in the hall. He knows why you're here, doesn't he?" Russell shrugged. "That's why I need my XR. He's following us." Several minutes passed silently while Piper tried to digest everything. "Piper? Someone needs to go for help." "What about Hank?" "He's after me." Piper's eyes bored into him. "He's after us now, Russell. There's a taser in my pack. Take it, just in case." Wincing as she shifted to her knees, she dug into the bottom to find the taser. She moved closer to Russell, putting the XR and holster near his side, placing his hand on it. She pulled the frayed map from Russell's pack. After circling their location and making a few notes, she looked across the valley at the saddle, then back at the blood-soaked bandage on Russell's side. No good options. Wait for rescue that won't come soon enough. Or leave them here alone. With a sigh, she traced out a route. On a good day, 2, maybe 3 hours to the saddle. "A good day?" he said with a dry laugh. The corner of her mouth lifted. "I've had better." "It's getting late," Russell murmured. Piper checked the sun. It was inching towards the trees, its light turning amber through the haze. From there, less than an hour to the old county highway. Not many travel that way. She folded the map and paused for a moment. "Victor's bad and getting worse. You've lost a lot of blood." Russell's eyes flicked to the blood-stained bandana on her head. "So have you. Head wounds often look worse than they are." He didn't respond, but she could recognize the doubt in his eyes. "You can't carry much not like that." When she reached up to adjust the sling, her nerves sent a shocking reminder up her arm. "I'll only take what I need," she said, pushing the doubts away. Her shredded pack would only slow her down, but she thankfully still had her day pack. She removed it and stuffed the taser, map, headlamp, and water bottle into it. Reaching across Russell, she checked his bandage. "Try to keep pressure on that while I'm gone." Russell nodded. She waited, but nothing more came as his breath turned ragged. After several minutes, he opened his eyes. "Where?" Piper met his gaze firmly. "I'm going for help. I'll make it." "Doesn't help, but I'm sorry." Piper shrugged and looked away. "With any luck, a rescue team should be here by morning. Make sure Victor takes in water every hour, okay?" Russell nodded as she used her support stick to stand. "Piper?" She turned to look back at them both. "Yes?" "Be careful. Don't be a hero. Watch your back." He'd stopped fighting her, but it didn't feel like a victory. She tilted her head and tried to smile. Then she took a deep breath and limped down the slope to the valley below. Her pack was light, but her burden was heavier than ever. Shadows crept across the valley floor as Piper knelt at the creek to filter water one-handed. The cold stream reminded her how weak she'd become. Her reflection wavered in the ripples of the pool, barely recognizable. "Too late for second thoughts, girl." Briars tore at her arms as she climbed into a rhododendron hella-living wall of intertwined branches. The canopy blocked out the sky, turning afternoon into perpetual dusk. The tangle disoriented her, forcing detours that turned her round and round. After 30 minutes, the draw opened into dim light, the ridgeline farther than before. She sat on a rock to rest. As she pushed herself up, a loud snap came from lower in the ravine. Too big for a squirrel. A deer? She stood quietly, then shook her head and started moving again. Twilight came early in the ravine. She switched on her headlamp, the narrow beam turning each wet rhododendron leaf to black glass. Crickets and tree frogs began their chorus calming until it stopped. Silence, she knew, was when trouble began. As she crested the ridge, the ravine's premature dusk gave way to the last of the day's light. Something passed through a shaft of sun, but disappeared into the shadows. Groaning at the sight of a steep ravine she would have to cross, she leaned against a boulder and downed more ibuprofen with the last of her water. She edged down the slope, but the ravine deepened into a drop she could no longer manage. Going back wasn't an option. I can't do this. She closed her eyes, briefly giving in to the growing despair that followed her like a fog. A fox squirrel chittered at her, drawing her attention to a large beech the storm had taken out, its massive trunk bridging the deepest part of the ravine. Pale bark gleamed in the fading light. Every instinct screamed to turn back. She'd been 9, maybe 10, frozen halfway across a fallen beach over a rocky Kentucky creek, too ashamed to move. Later that summer, her grandpa had brought her back. He'd led her out to the center, let go of her hand, and stepped away. Don't let it beat you. She'd crossed. Wiping her eyes, she stood, discarded her support stick, and worked her way up onto the beach. Clear of the ravine's edge, Piper stopped on the root ball, looking for a way down. The shadows were deepening, and she couldn't be certain what was below her. Grabbing onto a root, she swung down to what she hoped was solid ground. She landed with a thump on a muddy clump and slid sideways. Only her grip on the root kept her from slipping into the ravine. She steadied herself and stepped onto firm ground. A sudden chill sent a shiver up her spine. She felt alone and watched at the same time. She searched the ground for a staff, and her racing heart slowed when she found a broken branch and felt the strength of it in her hand. She hastened up the ridge on the straightest route possible, every shadow a reminder of the fading light. 20 minutes of clambering left her at the outcropping along the ridge. Her legs trembled with each step. Not much further. The sun was just above the horizon, only visible through the gap she knew led to the old highway she needed to reach. She was less than half a mile from the gap, but the terrain dipped down and back up 100 or more feet. She paused, fearful of sitting to rest, knowing she might not be able to continue if she did. A rustle in the brush behind her drew her attention. Looking back, she relaxed as a blue jay scampered out and flew onto a nearby rhododendron branch. She moved around a rock jutting 20 feet straight up, remnants of an ancient rockfall. The footing was treacherous, loose shards and sediment shifting under each step, heat still radiating from sun-warmed stone. She leaned on her staff to step down through a gap in the boulders, crevices everywhere. Victor's words came back too late. Rattlers occasionally din here. The air stilled. Even the crickets paused. A harsh rattle. Sharp, quick. Too late. The diamondback struck. Pain exploded in her leg as fangs sank deep. Fire surged through her calf as venom spread with each heartbeat. With what presence of mind she had left, she swung her staff against its head, knocking it free and adding to the damage on her leg. It writhed on the ground, and the light of her headlamp caught it slithering back through the pile of rubble and under the rock overhang she had stepped off of. The intense burning was like nothing Piper had ever experienced. She staggered, only the staff kept her upright. The pain of setting her broken arm paled in comparison. Sorry, Victor. Russell. The image of the others pushed out the regrets. You wanted this. Finish it. She fought through the mental fog, desperately trying to recall her first aid training. Bits and pieces came to her in a jumble. Her only hope was reaching the highway. Knowing she should stay still made her chest tighten, breath stuttering toward panic. Her grandpa's calm voice filled her mind, giving her enough focus to ease back from the brink. Road, she said out loud, to force herself to focus on the remaining goal. The last light faded. Twilight moved to night. Each step smaller. Shuffle. Stop. Breathe. Shuffle. At last, she reached the gap. The trees parted, and a slash of darkness cut the slope below. The road. Less than 100 yards. She could make it. Had to make it. Stop. Breathe. Step. Stop. A snap behind her. What was that? Silence. The forest held its breath. Step. Stop. Footsteps running towards her. Her mind cleared enough to remember. The taser. Pulling it from her day pack, she waited. A rush of steps as someone knocked her to the ground. She pressed the trigger and stabbed blindly, only stopping when she heard the thump of a body falling to the ground next to her. She staggered to her feet, falling back to her knees when the throbbing in her calf grew too strong. "I can't, Grandpa." Her strength failing, she started to give in to the despair. But in the distance, she saw pricks of light, headlights moving down the dark ribbon, getting closer. She forced herself to her feet. Step. Stop. Breathe. The lights brightened as a car approached the steep curve below her. She tried to shout and wave her arm, but could manage no more than a hoarse whisper. The car slowed for the curve, but kept moving. Then the lights swept past, and she was alone again. No. The world had gone silent again. Even the night seemed to wait. Not yet. Not like this. The whistle. She still had the whistle. She blew 3 sharp blasts, again and again, until the last of her breath left her, and she fell back to her knees. Nothing left but red lights, taillights disappearing around the bend. Then, red flared bright. Brake lights! The car lurched to a stop, white reverse lights moving back up the curve until the car slowly turned back and forth, headlights sweeping the trees and brush, searching. The engine cut out. A rustle and a groan in the brush near her. Hesitant footsteps moving away. Footsteps running towards her. A man's voice yelled. Another light. 2. Flashlights. Another voice, a woman's, calling out. Footsteps running through the brush. Oh my God. Her strength failed her and she collapsed. She tried to speak, to tell them about Russell and Victor, about the notes on her map. Words failed her. The woman's voice. Are you okay? The man's voice. Send the squad. On the curve, over the ridge, along Stone Ridge Road. Hurry. Beep, beep, beep. Piper stirred. Antiseptic smell. Harsh light through her eyelids. You're awake. Stay calm. You're okay. Something cool touched her arm. Darkness returned. When she opened her eyes again, a familiar voice broke through the fog. Hey. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite forming a smile. It's me, Thomas. You had quite the adventure. Where am I? Mission Hospital. You're in good hands. Piper closed her eyes. I was reckless. You were brave. She fell back asleep. When she woke again, Thomas was still there. Russell wanted... I know. He told me what happened. You saved him, you know. Twice, he says. She managed a small laugh. He did? Thomas shrugged and smiled. He's not all bad. There was a snake. Yeah, that's the one that almost got you. Gave you a good dose. Should've, could've seen it coming. Maybe. Maybe not. Did they catch him? She asked. Who? Someone was following me. Thomas frowned. There was no one there when the squad came, Pip. I believe you, Pip. Her face tensed, and tears formed on her cheeks. Her voice wavered. Russell said Hank was out there. She turned towards Thomas and closed her eyes. Thomas brushed the hair out of her eyes. You've been through a lot. We'll talk about it later. Several minutes later, she opened her eyes again. Thomas was sitting near her bed. Hello, she said, trying to force a smile she didn't yet feel. Welcome back, Piper, he said with a smile of relief. You've had a rough go of it these last few days. Yup. Squad brought you in over 2 nights ago. What's the last thing you remember? Thomas asked. The rattler. It hurt so bad. I'm sure. I tased someone. Hank. Maybe. I almost gave up, but I saw lights. White lights. On the road. I thought I was saved. They didn't see me. I remember red taillights moving away. Then it was all very fuzzy. I think I remember voices. Thomas put his hand on her arm. A couple found you. It was warm, and they had their windows down, enjoying the quiet road. When they slowed around that corner, they heard your whistle. Really? Yeah, really. Close call, but here you are. Yeah, here I am. She smiled for real this time, then asked, What about the others? The EMTs found your map and your notes. A rescue team went in at first light to stabilize them until the chopper could evac them. Victor is conscious now, in a room down the hall. Russell was discharged yesterday. I'm glad, she said, laying her head back against the pillow again and smiling. I did it, Grandpa. I saved them both. He came by yesterday, Thomas said. No, Russell. Before you woke up. Piper's eyes widened. Yeah, I know, Thomas said. I was surprised too. He stood in the doorway, leaning on his crutches for a while, just watching you. Thomas paused. He told me what happened to Willow. She took his place as leader on that trip. She died because of it. Piper blinked back a tear. He's been carrying that. Thomas nodded. And taking it out on you. Piper looked away. He said he misjudged the situation. The situation? Piper snorted and rolled her eyes. Did he at least apologize for calling me the weaker partner? Thomas snorted, laughing as he continued. Russell? Apologize? Those meds must have made you delirious. The laughter faded, and they sat in pleasant silence for a few minutes. The nurse came back into the room, breaking the silence. Thomas forced a smile and said, You haven't asked about the results. Results? Who cares? Piper said, smiling as it dawned on her what she'd accomplished. I pulled Russell up a cliff with a busted arm and hiked across a ravine with venom in my veins, she added with a smile. The nurse moved between her and Thomas to check her. After adjusting her IV, she said, I think that's enough for now. He turned to go, stopping in the door. See you soon. The nurse pulled a folded piece of paper and a hospital napkin out of her pocket and handed them to Piper. Victor's visitor dropped these at the nurse's station. He said Victor wanted you to have it, but he didn't want to disturb you while you were sleeping. She grabbed the hospital napkin in her lap and tilted her head to see it. Scrawled on the back, she read, Wilderness Rescue Training Certification, Extreme Edition, Pipre K. Malloy. She stared at the napkin and grinned. Seriously, Victor, I think you do this on purpose now. What else did you write? She unfolded the paper. Be careful out there, Piper. Mountains are dangerous. She laughed lightly. No kidding. She started to set the note aside, then stopped. She looked at the napkin. Pipre. Then the note. Piper. Victor never once got it right. He didn't write this. Hank was here while she slept. Don't let it beat you. Now it has a name.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.